This is Stone Mountain, the largest Confederate monument in the United States of America, carved into the side of a mountain just east of Atlanta, Georgia. This rebel predecessor to Mount Rushmore has an incredibly complex history and is certainly controversial, but it still remains as the most popular tourist attraction in the state of Georgia, and I'm actually visiting here for the first time during their famous Christmas event. But in this video, we'll dive into the story of Stone Mountain and go on top of it. The figures of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, as well as Generals Robert E. Lee and Thomas Stonewall Jackson all riding on horseback, are emblazoned into the face of this rather unique dome monadnock. The Stone Mountain is actually the largest exposed granite outcrop in the entire world. The world's largest bas-relief was carved into it as a state-designated memorial to the Confederacy throughout the 20th century. Plans for the sculpture in Stone Mountain came about in the 1910s as a leading member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, Helen Plain, first raised the idea, but it was only completed in 1972 after a tumultuous history. In 1915, the Stone Mountain Confederate Memorial Association, in collaboration with the Daughters of the Confederacy, hired Gutzon Borglum for the monumental task. However, he soon had issues with Helen Plain and the organizations, who were disrupting his grand vision for the monument by wanting him to include more Ku Klux Klan imagery. Borglum did have ties to the Klan, though he was never a member. He did attend their events here at Stone Mountain up until the early 1920s, and was good friends with Indiana's infamous Grand Dragon D.C. Stevenson. In 1924, after Borglum had been working for years on the mountain, the association became irritated with his slow progress and fired him. So Borglum destroyed all the plans and models and escaped the Georgia police in a dramatic episode. He then went on to South Dakota to design Mount Rushmore instead. Borglum's decade of work was blasted off the face of the mountain, and a new sculptor, Augustus Lukeman, designed the current rendition based on Borglum's scheme. Lukeman's sculpture is smaller than what Borglum's was going to be, just featuring Lee, Davis, and Jackson at a height of 90 feet. However, he only ever finished Lee's head before funds ran out. There is a Memorial Hall museum on the grounds, but that is closed today, and there are also monuments scattered around the grounds commemorating the former Confederate states. Before I continue with the story, let's start heading up to the summit of Stone Mountain on the Skyride, an aerial tramway that will provide a closer look at the colossal carving.
Carving should be coming into view right about now. It's the world's largest stone relief carving. It is 90 feet tall by 190 feet wide, and it goes 40 feet deep into the mountain.
Work on the Stone Mountain sculpture stopped just before the Great Depression as funds ran out, and the carving remained mostly incomplete. But in 1956, after a decades-long hiatus, Georgia's new segregationist governor Marvin Griffin vowed to complete the memorial as a state-funded project, believed to be in response to the recent Brown v. Board of Education case. Work again resumed on the carving in the midst of the civil rights movement. The park officially opened to the public in 1965, and the sculpture was finally completed in 1972. Alright, we have made it to the top of the geologic anomaly at 1,686 feet above sea level, about 825 feet above the ground. This is Atlanta, so there's Coca-Cola available up here. Visitors can just roam around the rocky top of Stone Mountain. It is awesome up here. However, some not so awesome ceremonies were being held up here about a century ago. In 1915, the year Gutzon Borglum was hired on to start planning the memorial, an Alabama preacher named William J. Simmons held a Thanksgiving gathering here atop the mountain to re-establish the Ku Klux Klan. They burned a 16-foot tall cross atop the mountain, and from then on the summit became a sacred site for white supremacists as the rebirth location for the modern Klan. Simmons' ceremony, which occurred right around here, was the beginning point of a nationwide resurgence for the Ku Klux Klan that was particularly prominent in the South and the Midwest during the 1920s. At that time, the Stone Mountain was owned by the local Venable brothers, who owned various quarries. One of the brothers became involved in this resurgence of Klan activity, so they granted the Klan continued access to use the mountaintop and grounds for their meetings and ceremonies. I noticed a Black Panther head carved into the rock up here. Granite quarried from this mountain was used to build the steps up to the east wing of the United States Capitol building, as well as the vaults in the U.S. Treasury building, and even some locks for the Panama Canal. Over a decade ago, when they were considering stone samples for the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C., samples of Stone Mountain granite were sent in. Interestingly, they chose to import granite from China instead, but it could have been sculpted out of stone from America's largest Confederate memorial in Dr. King's hometown. There are some great views from the top of the mountain overlooking the Atlanta metropolitan area. There's the skyline of downtown Atlanta, and those are the high-rises of Buckhead. That down there is a historic plantation house that was relocated here to Stone Mountain in 1961, opening as the Stony Acres Plantation. It served as an antebellum plantation museum, with slave quarters that were described as, quote, neat and well furnished in the old promotional materials. They even hired Butterfly McQueen, the woman who played Prissy in Gone with the Wind, as a tour guide. I had no idea about this and couldn't really tell from up here, but it had caught on fire just a week before I visited, and is now considered a total loss. This is what the opposite facade looks like now. The Dickey House looks fine from the mountain. Presumably a lot of the artifacts in there were also destroyed, so I assume the centerpiece of the longtime Stone Mountain attraction currently known as Historic Square will be no more. I definitely wish I could have visited that. Well, that was neat. Now let's head back down Stone Mountain. This largest of Confederate monuments has been subject to a lot of scrutiny in recent times, and there have been repeated calls for the giant Confederate leaders to be sandblasted off the face of the mountain. These started with declarations by the Atlanta NAACP and other organizations after the 2015 Charleston AME church shooting. Then in the summer of 2020, amidst the George Floyd protests and subsequent nationwide takedown of Confederate monuments made around the same time as Stone Mountain first began, over 100 armed protesters came to the park to call for the sculpture's removal, and the park was temporarily shut down after a small fight broke out. But the historic carving in the mountain honoring Lee, Jackson, and Davis remains as the centerpiece of a highly popular attraction, complete with its own little amusement park down there. So in time we'll see what the future holds for Stone Mountain.
Heading over to Crossroads or the Memorial Lawn, take the
The history of Stone Mountain is wild and problematic, but it is a fascinating place to visit. I certainly want to come back and explore more thoroughly outside of the holiday season. Regardless, we're going to move on to the Christmas festivities, which include a train ride, parade, fireworks, the world's largest Christmas light show, and a drone show against the backdrop of the Stone Mountain carving. So that's going to be tons of fun. Check out my separate video on that experience, which is linked in the description. It's one of the best Christmas events I've ever seen. If you enjoyed this video, then please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. I have many other videos featuring Civil War history and other historic locations, roadside attractions, natural wonders, and more across the United States and Europe. And thanks for watching!